In fast-paced developments surrounding strategic affairs and the military campaign in Syria, a Russian Su-24 fighter plane. It was shot down by Turkish F-16 for violating its airspace. And Turkey, the country that borders Syria, is also a NATO member. Now, while Turkey says its action was not directed against any country, the Russians are taking the matter seriously, especially since Russia's role in Syria has been questioned in the past by primary NATO leader, the United States. Now, France continues to build a coalition against ISIS that appears independent of NATO, even though most of the countries on board are NATO members. All this in the aftermath of the Paris attacks, day 11.
While Russian and French airstrikes continue on ISIS-held positions in Syria, Turkey on Tuesday shot down a Russian military jet, which it says violated its airspace near the Syrian border. The Russians confirmed the fighter was theirs, sending helicopters in search of the pilots. It comes a week after Ankara had summoned the Russian ambassador to protest against Turkish villages on the Syrian border being bombed. The Russians are taking the matter seriously, but said it was too early to draw conclusions.
But today's event is the blow that has been given to us in our back by the accomplices of terrorists.
In line with the military rules of engagement, Turkish authorities repeatedly warned an unidentified aircraft that they were 15 kilometers or less away from the border. The aircraft didn't heed the warnings. Turkey is a member of NATO, and at its request, an extraordinary meeting of the NATO was called to explain the action. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom, which joined forces with France on Monday, is expected to start airstrikes on ISIS within a week.
Priorities are to deter state-based threats, to tackle terrorism, and I can tell the House today that we put in place a significant new contingency plan to deal with major terrorist attacks.
French President François Hollande will meet US President Barack Obama at the White House, a priority meeting on Obama's return from a 10-day tour of Asia to discuss ways to confront the scourge of terrorism and coordinate US efforts to assist France's probe into the Paris attacks. He's also scheduled to meet German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Italy's Matteo Renzi, and Russian President Vladimir Putin this week. French police found a suicide bomb belt in a bin in a Paris suburb, Montrouge. They sealed the area. The belt was found without a detonator near where Paris attacks suspect Salah Abdeslam was traced to on the night of the attacks. The French continue to join forces within Europe to destroy Daesh, the Arabic name for ISIS. EU Council President Donald Tusk met François Hollande at the Élysée Palace, a meeting focused on tightening borders. Meanwhile, EU capital Brussels and the rest of Belgium remains on high alert for at least another 6 days. Belgian authorities have charged a fourth suspect with terrorism offences related to the 13th November assault on Paris. Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel believes Brussels still faces risks that are severe enough to merit the highest threat level. The US has issued a worldwide travel alert, warning its citizens of the risks of traveling because of increased terror threats. With respect to India, a report drawn up with the help of MI6 and CIA and some Arab countries and shared at the topmost level of the government of India says in the ISIS, Indian, Pakistani, African and Bangladeshi fighters are considered inferior to Arab fighters and are generally tricked into carrying out suicide bombings. News Night Desk, DD News.
And to put all this into context for us, we are joined in the studio by G Parthasarthy, former senior diplomat and well-known strategic affairs analyst. And from Mumbai, joining us is Alok Bansal, Director for Security and Strategy at the India Foundation. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. We'll start with you, Mr. Bansal. The UNSC says that, the threat of ISIS is a threat, it's a global threat to international peace and security, and does that actually mean that it has given sanction actually for airstrikes?
See, while the UN claims that the threat from IS is a global threat, there has not been a unanimity between the countries, and as a result, we see differing perceptions on how to tackle with IS. Because if you look at the US and the Western countries, while they are targeting IS, they are also supporting the forces which are fighting President Assad, which has a component of Al-Qaeda. Similarly, Turkey, while claiming that it opposes IS, is actually targeting the Kurdish forces, which have been in the forefront of targeting Islamic State. But most significant factor which we need to understand is that this battle cannot be won by bullets or bombs.
Okay.
This is an ideological battle, and one needs to understand what is the ideology that is drawing youth thousands of kilometers away from Iraq and Syria to give up their homes, give up the comforts of their homes, and travel to Iraq and Syria to fight in a jihad. So unless, of course, we carry out a dedicated, concerted de-radicalization program and the global community joins in it, I don't think so we'll be able to win this war against Islamic State. And
Right,
one of the countries which has had a fairly successful de-radicalization program has been Singapore, which is being visited by Prime Minister currently.
Mr. Parthasarthy, the bringing down of the Russian fighter jet, is this as innocent as it seems? I mean that, this is violating airspace, you bring down a plane. I mean, given the context that what is happening around the world today.
I think as Alok said, different people are fighting different enemies here. The Americans, together with Turkey, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, decided to overthrow the government of President Assad, who is Shia. For that purpose, they brought militant groups together.
Right.
The Syrian government lost control of large areas, and the ISIS has taken up that space.
Yes.
This has enabled ISIS to have more or less a country under its control, ranging from eastern Syria to the west of Iraq, right up to Mosul and Baghdad. So they control territory, they control oil, they've got everything they need to run a government.
Yes.
And in fact, they function like a government. They are radical lunatics. I mean, the way they sort of molest
They also have
women.
about a 30,000 strong army.
Yes,
apparently.
no, but the fact of the matter is, this bulk of that army, the best fighting force, is from Saddam Hussein's Revolutionary Guard, whom the Americans disarmed. So the Americans created the problems in Iraq.
Sure.
It has been compounded by Saudi Arabia, Turkey and others in Syria. And everybody is fighting everyone else. I think this Russian plane was targeted by the Turks because it was bombing Syrian Turkmen on the Turkish border, who are allies of Turkey.
Right.
So there are two reasons. I mean, Turkey may preach innocence, but there is also the other factor that they are on opposite sides in Syria on this thing. And the Russians back the Kurds. The Turks are at war with the Kurds. So I think there are too many local complexities. The US has brought together a number of countries on certain principles, not just war, but to bring them together militarily, certainly, but more importantly, to demystify the ideology of ISIS. It's an ideological battle.
Yes.
20,000 of their members who are fighting are from Europe or from Russia.
Fair enough. So it is an ideological battle, Mr. Bansal, and people who've studied what ISIS's aim or game plan is seem to suggest that they want to move eastwards, capture Afghanistan, Central Asian republics, parts of Iran, then Pakistan, and then, the final war is with India, apparently. That's what analysts say. How do you understand this?
See, according to a hadith in which IS believes, they believe that the end of time battle is going to be fought in Khorasan. And Khorasan is the area, according to Islamic lexicon, which comprises of parts of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia and Eastern Iran. So they believe that this end of time battle will be fought here, where Dajjal or the Antichrist will be defeated. And it is after victory in this battle, they believe there is going to be Ghazwa-e-Hind, or the battle for India. And when the forces come out from India after emerging victorious, that is the time they believe that Imam Mahdi would come out of occultation and a global Islamic emirate would be created. Now somebody may feel that this is a mythical account, but they believe in it and they are willing to lay down their lives for this particular belief. So this is a very serious issue, and that is one of the reasons why there has been a great urgency within the Islamic State to set up a Khorasan chapter.
Right. So let's, Mr. Parthasarthy, it's an ideological battle that has to be won ideologically. In this, what is actually being done? The Prime Minister says contain the sponsors of terrorism, and then, you know, the fight starts from there. Sponsors of terrorism meaning what? I mean, there are states that sponsor terrorism, and providing them with arms, providing them with finance. How do we stay? We have to contain that first.
No, as I said, there first has to be a consensus. Unless Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the US and Russia come on the same page, each one is going to fight the other one's enemy or support the other one's enemy. That is the situation on the ground. It's complicated, but it has to be done. The US is making this effort, but the US itself must forget about trying to keep Russia out or putting primary importance on the removal of Assad. Assad will perhaps go when a political settlement is reached and somebody he supports rules at least the Shia parts of Syria.
Right.
But that is going to take wise negotiations. Secondly, I think we must realize that foreign forces are going to be of little use. You will have to get local forces from the Arab world.
You're talking about fighting on the ground.
On the ground, absolutely. But the air support can certainly come from so many other countries. But I think also, as I said, it's equally important that America does not support Russia's enemy.
Okay.
And Russia just does not support America's enemy.
Sure.
And therefore, there has to be a political diplomatic consensus.
Okay.
Only then will you get a sense of order restored.
Right. And Mr. Bansal, do you see this diplomatic consensus being worked out? Because we see that after the Paris attacks, Francois Hollande has been meeting a number of important leaders and all of them pledging support. And today he's meeting the US President Barack Obama. He'll then be meeting Angela Merkel. He'll be meeting the Italians. And then he'll also finally be meeting Mr. Putin. What do you think is going to emerge from all this?
See, France, having been bitten by the terrorist bug, is, I think, more circumspect, and they have realized that the Russian attacks on IS are having the maximum impact. And to that extent, I think France is trying to build a consensus against IS. Whether he succeed in convincing the US that their single point agenda in Syria of regime change must yield to democratization, which President Assad has always been agreeable. As far as Turkey is concerned, this bringing down of aircraft will create issues which may have far wide ramifications, right, because Russia might start targeting Turkish planes, and that could create a no-fly zone on the Turkish-Syrian border, which will allow Kurdish forces on ground to gain ground and create subsequent problems and create some sort of an autonomous zone on that border area.
Mr. Parthasarthy, what are the immediate concerns that India should have? Let's say we have economic interests in the Gulf, for instance, pretty strong. A lot of our people are there. Could, spillover effects affect us?
Look, the Gulf is very volatile. Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia is fighting a war in Yemen which nobody can understand. Yemen is being bombed every day. Saudi energy is being wasted away on this, instead of dealing with the larger ISIL threat, because ISIL have made it very clear that they regard the Saudi monarchy as kafirs, more or less,
okay,
to that effect. Okay. So I think what, as I said earlier, we need to come back. Identify how we do not cross each other,
sure,
in fighting the ISIL, point number one.
Right.
And point number two, putting all our energies together in seeing that ISIS are defeated. They can be defeated militarily,
okay,
but the ideology has also to be defeated.
One final word from you, Mr. Bansal. What about isolation of Pakistan Army, ISI, and also the concerns about ISIS entering Bangladesh?
As far as Pakistan is concerned, it has actually not been able to take a conscious decision on dealing with radicalization because for long, security establishment of Pakistan has exploited these radical organizations to further its perceived foreign policy goals. As far as radical elements' entry into Bangladesh is concerned, the current Bangladeshi government has dealt with radical elements with the iron hand, and I feel as long as the current government continues with its policy of no tolerance towards extremism, I think IS will find it difficult to grow in Bangladesh.
Right. So finally, Mr. Parthasarthy, we are on the right track in terms of, this fight against ISIS. India would like to work only through the UN system and also, first contain the sponsors and the sources of terrorism.
Also with regard to some of our young men going astray.
Yes, in fact, this
I think a process,
for instance, yes.
I think a process should be undertaken across India to warn them that this is a movement condemned by every Islamic country in the world, including Saudi Arabia on the one end and Iran on the other, and that it is leading everybody to disaster, and you will only be cannon fodder if you go. Because even a few people radicalized is not in our interest. But the most redeeming feature is our 175 million Muslim population has stayed away from this, whereas in other countries like Britain
and come out strongly in protest against what ISIS is doing as well.
UK, in the UK, France, they have been influenced. I think the important thing is our Muslim brothers here are Indian.
Right.
They are foreigners.
Right. We leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Parthasarthy, and thank you very much, Mr. Bansal, for joining us. You're watching Newsnight. Let's take a break right at this point in time. Do keep watching.